As the townsfolk of Cedar Falls presented their shattered girl to Jacob Hartwell, they anticipated that the battle-worn Civil War veteran would either partake in their derision or recoil in revulsion. Instead, this limping tinker noticed something in Scarlett's haunted eyes that would alter both their fates. A realization that society's overlooked fragments often possess the greatest worth. What unfolds when two individuals, deemed insignificant by society, choose to challenge the world's perception of them? The hammer struck the glowing metal with a resounding clang, sending sparks scattering like miniature stars throughout Jacob Hartwell's shadowy workshop. Sweat trickled down his forehead as he toiled, despite the October morning being chilly enough to freeze the water in the bucket by his door. His powerful hands manipulated the radiant piece of iron, transforming it from a state of disrepair into a functional creation. Jacob wiped his brow with a grimy cloth, surveying the cramped quarters above Morrison's store. Neatly arranged on wooden shelves were pots featuring holes, each one perfectly positioned in its row. Curved spoons lingered in a basket by the window. A clock devoid of hands ticked softly on his workbench, mysteriously maintaining perfect time despite its inability to reveal that time to anyone. For 3 years, he had been mending and repairing in Cedar Falls. It had been 3 years since he returned from the war, grappling with a leg that refused to function properly and haunted by nightmares that disturbed his sleep most nights. The townsfolk came to him with their damaged belongings, offering fair payment, yet they seldom lingered to engage in meaningful conversation. They regarded his limp and addressed him as if he were incapable of grasping ordinary language. That was perfectly acceptable to Jacob. He grasped a great deal. He recognized that individuals discarded items that still held potential for usefulness. He recognized that a battered pot could still contain soup, and a fractured mirror could still reflect your image. Above all, he grasped that being shattered did not equate to being devoid of value. The church bell tolled 8 times, signaling to Jacob that the town was stirring to life for yet another day. The sound of horses' hooves echoed on the dirt road below, accompanied by the calls of women urging their children to hasten to school. Mrs. Patterson was about to unveil her bakery, and the aroma of freshly baked bread would soon waft through the air, stirring Jacob's empty Saliga hatch into a chorus of growls. He grasped the delicate music box that had been gifted to him just the day before. The delicate dancer within was meant to twirl upon the lid's opening, yet she remained motionless, simply sitting still. Her pink dress had lost its vibrancy, and one of her arms had come off entirely. The individual who delivered it mentioned, "Simply discard it if you can't repair it easily." Jacob cradled the tiny dancer gently in his hand. Her painted visage gazed up at him, eyes reflecting a silent plea for assistance. He had encountered that expression previously, reflected in mirrors, and mirrored in the faces of fellow soldiers who returned transformed by the war. It was the gaze of a person who retained an inner beauty, yet questioned whether it was visible to others. "Don't fret, dear one," Jacob murmured gently to the small silhouette. "I'll find a way to bring back your dance." He placed the music box on his designated shelf, the one reserved for projects that required additional contemplation and attention. Beside it rested a photograph in a shattered frame, the sole image he possessed of his family before the war claimed him and illness claimed them. His mother and father stood rigid and solemn in their Sunday attire, yet Jacob recalled the joyous laughter they shared in the evenings once the farm chores were completed. The sudden jarring sound of a crash from the street below startled Jacob, causing him to leap in surprise. He hurried to his window and peered down to catch sight of young Billy Morrison gathering apples that had tumbled from a cart. Billy's face flushed with rage as he unleashed a torrent of words that would have surely earned Jacob a stern reprimand in his youth. "Foolish old horse!" Billy shouted, striking the wooden cart with his foot. "Everything in this town feels off these days." Jacob observed as Billy marched away in a huff toward his father's store, the apples strewn carelessly across the ground. Some bore bruises, others stood flawless. Yet Billy concluded they were all devoid of value simply because they had made contact with the earth. It brought to mind a saying from his father, "Son, the world is filled with individuals who struggle to distinguish between what is merely dirty and what is truly ruined." The morning sun ascended, casting a warm golden glow through Jacob's dusty window. He ignited his modest stove and set a pot of water to boil for coffee, a familiar ritual he'd adhered to for 3 years. coffee, work, a straightforward dinner, and sleep when the haunting dreams took him away. It may not have been grand, but it was serene, and it belonged to him. As he swirled sugar into his coffee, a sound pierced the air, chilling him to the bone. Laughter echoed from the street, but it wasn't the kind that stemmed from happiness. This was the cruel laughter that erupted when individuals discovered a target more vulnerable to mock. Jacob had encountered it numerous times during the war, typically just before something dreadful occurred. Jacob placed his coffee aside and returned to the window. A small crowd was forming near the general store, their voices rising in volume and hostility with each passing moment. Though he couldn't discern their focus, the sound of Billy Morrison's voice cut through the crowd, rising above the rest. "See who has returned to town," Billy shouted. "Our uniquely eccentric Scarlet." Jacob's hands clutched the windowsill, his knuckles paling to a stark white. He had caught wind of murmurs regarding Scarlet prior to this, how she had departed the town abruptly 2 years prior. People remarked that she had become simple-minded after experiencing difficulties with her stepfather. However, Jacob had never laid eyes on her himself, and he had assumed that the tales were merely the sort of cruel rumors that small towns delight in circulating. The throng swelled, their laughter sharpening into something more sinister. Jacob noticed a group gathering in a circle around something or someone by the front steps of the store. A familiar sensation twisted in his Salija Hotch. The Jacoby unsettling dread he experienced during the war, when he sensed that something terrible was imminent for those unable to protect themselves. What was he meant to do regarding it? Scarlett Murphy pressed herself against the frigid brick wall of Morrison's store, yearning to vanish entirely into the crevices between the stones. The throng surrounding her continued to swell, their expressions radiating a fervor that spelled trouble for someone in her position. Returning to Cedar Falls was a misstep, yet she found herself with no other options when the job opportunities dried up in the neighboring town. "Perform for us, Scarlett," Billy Morrison yelled, his voice, still youthful at 17, strained in an attempt to convey maturity. "Just like you did back in the day before everything went off the rails." Scarlett's hands trembled as she wrapped her frayed shawl more securely around her shoulders. Her dress, once a vibrant blue, now resembled the dull hue of dirt, a testament to countless nights spent under the open sky. For 2 days, she had subsisted solely on wild berries, and the emptiness in her Salija Hotch left her feeling lightheaded and frail.
"I don't dance anymore,"
she whispered, her voice barely audible, a secret meant only for herself. Mrs. Ella navigated the throng, her round face feigning a look of worry. "Poor thing," she exclaimed, her voice carrying for all to hear, "has been roaming about like a stray creature ever since that incident with Harold Wickham. It seems that some individuals struggle to cope with the challenges that life presents." Scarlett felt her heart race at the sound of her stepfather's name. Harold Wickham had been absent from Cedar Falls for 2 years, yet the fabrications he spun about her before his departure continued to shadow her at every turn. His tale was accepted by many, as it offered a simpler explanation than confronting the harsh reality of the events that unfolded within those walls. Mr. Patterson, the baker, noted her struggles with a keen eye. He gestured toward Scarlett's soiled garments and disheveled hair, likely pilfering food from fields and resting in stables. That's the outcome when young girls believe they're above genuine effort. Billy scooped up a small rock from the earth, feeling its weight in his palm, a grin spreading across his face as he looked at his friends. Perhaps it's time to guide her in the ways of etiquette, assisting her in recalling how to conduct herself appropriately in the presence of respectable individuals. Scarlett scanned her surroundings with urgency, seeking an avenue of escape, yet the throng had her cornered against the wall. They outnumbered her, each one larger and more powerful than she could ever hope to be. Her thoughts drifted to that serene refuge she sought when times grew dire, the sanctuary where she could imagine herself in a completely different world. In that moment, her gaze lifted, and there he was. A figure lingered by the window overlooking the shop, gazing intently at the unfolding tableau beneath him. He possessed brown hair and gentle eyes, and his face reflected the Jacoby expression Scarlett recognized in her own reflection in shop windows, a look that conveyed the understanding of pain inflicted by those who were meant to be guardians instead. For a fleeting instant, their gazes intertwined across the transparent barrier. Scarlett experienced a flicker of an emotion she hadn't encountered in ages, a small glimmer of hope that perhaps, amidst the sea of unkind expressions, there was someone who might recognize her humanity rather than viewing her as mere amusement. The man vanished from the window, and Scarlett felt her heart plummet once more. Naturally, he would refrain from offering assistance. What would compel a stranger to provoke the ire of the townspeople merely to safeguard someone like her? She was an ordinary girl, marked by a tarnished reputation, with no family remaining to concern themselves with her fate. "What seems to be the matter, Scarlett?" Billy jeered, flicking his rock into the air and snatching it back with ease. "Lost for words? Or perhaps you lack the depth to grasp our message." The audience erupted in laughter, and Scarlett sensed the sting of tears welling up behind her eyes. She refused to shed a tear in their presence. She had discovered early on that tears only served to amuse bullies further. Instead, she attempted to shrink further against the brick wall, wishing they would lose interest and abandon her. "Let her be." A voice emerged from the throng, soft yet resolute. Scarlett glanced upward to find the man from the window positioned at the base of the wooden staircase that ascended to his shop. He ambled with a noticeable limp, favoring his right leg, yet there was an undeniable strength in the way he carried himself. Billy spun on his heel, clutching the rock tightly in his grasp. "Good morning, Jacob. We're simply enjoying some light-hearted moments with Scarlett here. No offense intended." Jacob, that was the name of the man. He fixed his gaze on Scarlett as he spoke. "The enjoyment has come to an end." "Just a moment, Jacob," Mr. Morrison, Billy's father, interjected. He advanced with the practiced grin he reserved for clients. "The young lad was merely—" "I stated that it's finished." There was a quality in Jacob's voice that caused even Billy to retreat a step. Scarlett noticed the scars etched on Jacob's hands and a delicate white line tracing across his forehead, a mark that suggested a brush with something sharp and perilous. The audience began to murmur quietly, yet no one appeared ready to confront Jacob face to face. Scarlett observed him as he navigated the remaining stairs, each step measured yet resolute. Upon reaching the bot Elijah, he extended his hand toward her. "Come on, miss," Jacob said softly. "There's coffee brewing upstairs, and it's starting to cool down." Scarlett regarded his outstretched hand with suspicion, as if it were a potential snare. From her perspective, when men extended their assistance, it often came with an expectation of something undesirable in exchange. Yet Jacob's eyes held a distinct quality, setting them apart from Harold Wickham's gaze, unlike those of Billy Morrison as well. They regarded her as someone deserving of assistance, rather than as an object to be exploited. With deliberate caution, Scarlett extended her hand and let her soiled fingers rest in Jacob's pristine palm. His hand was warm and calloused from toil, and he grasped hers tenderly, as if she were a delicate treasure that could shatter under the slightest pressure. "That's it," Jacob murmured gently, taking one step at a time. As they strolled toward the stairs, Scarlett noticed the crowd behind them beginning to disperse. Several individuals expressed their dissatisfaction that their morning amusement concluded in such a brief span. People were murmuring about Jacob and what it signified for a man of his stature to welcome a girl like her into his life. Scarlett was unfazed by their whispers. For the first time in months, someone had decided to support her rather than harm her. As she ascended the wooden stairs alongside Jacob, she pondered whether this was the essence of safety, yet a faint voice in the recesses of her mind cautioned her. Positive moments always seemed fleeting for someone like her. Scarlett's hand trembled violently, causing the teacup to rattle against the wooden table like a caged bird, desperate for freedom. Jacob feigned ignorance, immersing himself in the task of igniting the small stove nestled in the corner of his workshop. The air was thick with the scent of coal and metal in the small room above Morrison's store, a stark contrast to the chaos of the street below where shouts and anger reverberated. "They won't hurt you up here," Jacob said softly, as he poured hot water into 2 worn cups. His words emerged with an unexpected harshness, akin to sandpaper gliding over wood. Scarlett sat upright in the sole chair, her posture as rigid as a fence post. Her tattered blue dress lay around her like faded flower petals. Her dark hair fell in disarray across her face, yet Jacob caught fleeting glimpses of bright green eyes that scanned the room like a feline seeking an exit. "What motivated you to assist me?" Her voice was a gentle murmur, barely audible, as if she were sharing a secret meant only for him. Jacob's hand halted mid-reach for the sugar bowl. During his 3 years residing above the shop, mending shattered pots and straightening twisted spoons, no one had ever posed that question to him. No one had ever found it necessary. Due to the fact that... He paused, seeking phrases that wouldn't come across as silly. Because I understand the feeling of being seen only for your flaws. For the first time since they had ascended the stairs, Scarlett's gaze locked onto his. In that instant, Jacob perceived something that constricted his chest. Not the chaos everyone insisted resided in her mind, but a keen intellect concealed behind artfully constructed bewilderment. She was far from simple-minded. Just as he was about to continue, the sound of heavy footsteps reverberated up the wooden stairs outside. Jacob hurried with surprising speed for someone with a bad leg, arriving at the door just as furious fists started to strike against it. "Reveal yourself, Hartwell." Billy Morrison's voice resonated through the fragile wood. "You possess something that isn't yours." "She's not an object," Jacob retorted, taken aback by the firmness in his own tone. "That girl has been stirring up mischief since she could take her first steps." Another voice emerged, that of Elijah Brennan, the blacksmith's son, who was twice the size of Jacob and half his age. It's about time someone instilled in her the importance of respect. Scarlett sprang to her feet with such urgency that the chair screeched across the floor. Her entire form shook, yet her voice remained unwavering. "It's time for me to leave. I take full responsibility for this." "Absolutely not." Jacob positioned himself between her and the door, his heart pounding fiercely against his ribs, reminiscent of a trapped creature. "You haven't made any mistakes." The thudding ceased abruptly, giving way to hushed voices conspiring in the corridor. Jacob recognized that sound, a familiar echo from the battlefield where men strategized on how to dismantle something while keeping their own hands clean. "There's a back way," Scarlett whispered, gesturing toward a narrow window that opened to the roof. "I am capable of descending the rain pipe. In that dress, you'll turn heads." With a pained gait, Jacob made his way to the tool chest, retrieving a substantial wrench from its depths. The burden was known to him, resting in his weathered hands. Moreover, fleeing only confirms their assumptions about you. Scarlett looked at him as if he had sprouted another head. "You simply don't get it. When men like that set their sights on something..." Her words faded away, yet the terror in her gaze completed the thought. Jacob's jaw clenched as the harsh reality started to align in his thoughts. A fresh noise pierced the air, the harsh grind of metal against metal. A figure was tampering with the lock. "The storage room," Jacob hissed, gesturing toward a small door concealed behind piles of broken furniture awaiting repair. "Conceal yourself there. Stay inside, regardless of what you might hear." Scarlett clutched his sleeve with fingers that were as cold as ice. "How about you?" Jacob gazed at the girl labeled as crazy, who had shown remarkable courage by placing her trust in a stranger when everything around her had crumbled. A change stirred within him, akin to old, corroded machinery finally coming to life after a long period of dormancy. "I'll be fine," he deceived. The lock clicked open precisely as Scarlett slipped behind the door of the storage room. Jacob pivoted to confront whatever lay ahead, the wrench weighing heavily in his hand and his mouth parched like ancient leather. Billy Morrison was the first to step through the doorway, his face flushed from both drink and rage. Following closely was Elijah Brennan, accompanied by Jake Murphy, the mayor's nephew. He had never toiled a day in his life, yet always seemed to have a lot to say regarding the affairs of others. "Where could she be?" Billy insisted, his gaze scanning the cramped space. "Gone," Jacob stated matter-of-factly. Elijah's laughter echoed, reminiscent of stones cascading down a slope. "Where have they gone?" "There's only one direction left to take, and we're fully prepared for it." As though his words had conjured them, additional voices floated up from the street below. It dawned on Jacob that everything had been meticulously orchestrated. They had no plans to allow Scarlett to depart without conflict. "This isn't about her," Jake declared, moving in with the assured stride of someone who had never faced a true confrontation. "This is about you believing you're superior to the rest of us, taking in stray dogs as if you're some sort of hero." "I'm no saint," Jacob replied, adjusting his stance on his strong leg. "Simply an individual who focuses on his own affairs. I may give it a shot at some point." Billy's hand glided toward the knife sheathed at his belt. "Your involvement turned our enjoyment into a matter of concern." The notion of fun lingered in the atmosphere, reminiscent of the haze from a smoldering blaze. Jacob pondered the tremor in Scarlett's hands, the cleverness she concealed behind a facade of insanity. She had an uncanny ability to pinpoint the location of the rain pipe without even glancing in its direction. This was not her first experience of needing to make a hasty exit through a window. "You're enjoyable," Jacob remarked thoughtfully. "It appears to be quite harsh from my perspective." Harshness. Elijah advanced with purpose, his enormous hands tightened into fists. "That girl has been courting trouble since she was just a little one. It's common knowledge what she did to her unfortunate stepfather." "What actions did she take?" Jacob inquired, though a part of him already feared the response. The three men shared glances thick with sinister implications. Billy's smile became as jagged as shattered glass. "Of course I captivated him, enticed him with her mischievous charm until the unfortunate man found himself unable to resist, then yelled assault when he attempted to make her an honest woman." Jacob's vision blurred, the edges tinged with crimson. The wrench quivered in his hand, waves of war memories flooding his mind. The echo of cannon fire, the cries of injured soldiers, the harsh realization that struck when all your faith in human decency shattered into fragments. "Leave," he murmured softly. "What is happening?" Jake stared, his mind racing with uncertainty. "Leave now!" Jacob bellowed, his voice resonating through the cramped space like a storm. For an instant, the three men recoiled, taken aback by the abrupt metamorphosis of the once quiet tinker into a figure both untamed and menacing. Yet as time flowed on, their collective strength emboldened them. "Come on, make us," Billy sneered as he drew his knife. At that moment, the storage room door let out a slow creak, and Scarlett emerged, gripping Jacob's largest hammer firmly with both hands. She stated that no one is forcing anyone to do anything, her voice unwavering and firm. "However, if you're curious about the true potential of a rebellious girl when she decides to stop fleeing, just take one more step forward." The atmosphere grew still, punctuated only by the rhythmic ticking of Jacob's aged clock and the labored breaths of four individuals. The sounds from the street intensified, becoming increasingly insistent. Time was slipping away, and every soul in that tight workshop felt the urgency. For the first time since Scarlett had returned to Cedar Falls, she found herself standing still, no longer in flight. And Jacob understood that at times, the greatest risk lay in remaining motionless and confronting the challenge head-on. 3 weeks slipped away like unturned pages from a book Scarlett had never summoned the courage to explore. Each morning began in a familiar manner. Jacob would rise from his bedroll beside the stove. Scarlett would step out from the storage room that had transformed into her bedroom, and they would collaborate in a serene quietude as the town below gradually awakened. Yet, in contrast to the apprehensive stillness of their initial days together, this silence carried a distinct quality, tranquil, like two pieces of a puzzle that had at last discovered their rightful place. Scarlett realized she possessed a talent for the intricate, delicate tasks that caused Jacob's eyes to tire. Her delicate fingers could navigate the intricate clock gears and music box mechanisms that had perplexed him for months. Even more astonishing, she appeared to grasp the essence of shattered objects instinctively. "Do you sense what's amiss with it?" On a Tuesday morning, Jacob inquired while Scarlett meticulously adjusted the warped spring of a pocket watch. She hesitated, a flush creeping across her cheeks. "That seems unwise." "Absolutely not," Jacob replied with conviction. "I engage in the Jacobi activity. Metal speaks when you learn to hear its voice." Scarlett's entire face radiated with a smile that elevated her from pretty to stunning. "I believed I was just conjuring it in my mind. The manner in which various breaks exhibit distinct emotions." It was the most extended expression she'd uttered since her arrival, and Jacob sensed a warm sensation blossoming in his chest. He came to understand the essence of trust. She was beginning to place her trust in him at last. Yet Cedar Falls was not prepared to allow them to discover tranquility. The initial indication of trouble appeared veiled in benevolence. Mrs. Ella from the Church Ladies' Auxiliary ascended the narrow stairs to Jacob's workshop, her hands cradling a basket draped in checkered cloth. She offered some fresh bread, her smile a facade that never touched her eyes. "Maybe we could discuss your visitor." Scarlett stood motionless at her workbench, a small screwdriver held tightly in her tense hand. Jacob navigated cautiously through the space between them, his injured leg throbbing from the dampness of the morning rain. "Scarlett is welcome here for as long as she wishes to remain." he stated with a blend of courtesy and resolve. Mrs. Ella's smile constricted, resembling a rope drawn taut. Jacob, well, my dear, I have no doubt your heart is in the right place, yet whispers are beginning to circulate. A young single woman cohabiting with a bachelor. It simply doesn't appear appropriate. What individuals express and what is actually the case are two distinct realities, Jacob responded. Absolutely. Absolutely. However, in a community that holds faith in high regard, appearances hold significant importance. Mrs. Ella placed the basket on Jacob's workbench with a thud that shook his tools. The young lady requires appropriate direction. Women's mentorship, maybe a role in service with a distinguished family. Scarlett's breath quickened, becoming shallow and rapid. Jacob recognized that familiar expression from his hunting days, the urgent weighing of escape against confrontation. I appreciate the bread, Jacob remarked, approaching the door with clear purpose. Scarlett and I have some tasks to complete. Mrs. Ella's facade of benevolence faltered slightly, revealing the iron resolve beneath. This is far from finished, Jacobuel. The town council holds valid concerns regarding moral influence and appropriate Christian conduct. Once she departed, Scarlett remained in her chair, quaking like a leaf caught in a tempest. She whispered that they want to send her away. They desire many things, Jacob remarked, as he positioned himself on his three-legged stool. It doesn't imply that they actually receive them. You simply don't grasp it. Scarlett's voice shattered like fragile glass. When others determine your challenges, they discover methods to bring them to fruition. They'll claim I took something or that I attempted to charm you. They'll weave tales until the entire world is convinced. Jacob examined her features, the pronounced cheekbones that hinted at nights filled with longing, the eyes that contained an abundance of wisdom for someone just shy of 20. Can you share what transpired with your stepfather? Scarlett froze like a statue. For an extended stretch of time, the sole noise was the rhythmic ticking of clocks echoing throughout the workshop. My mother finally said that Harold Wickham married her when I was 15. My mother passed away from fever that first winter, leaving me alone with him in that large house on Elm Street. Jacob's hands balled into fists, yet he maintained a soft tone. What actions did he take? What individuals like him consistently do to girls who have no escape? Scarlett's words emerged devoid of depth, lacking any trace of feeling. However, I became clever over time, began adding laudanum to his evening whiskey, just the right amount to ensure he would sleep soundly. That's not seduction, Jacob declared with intensity. That's the essence of endurance. Good luck explaining that to his drinking buddies when they discovered him slumped over in his own vomit one too many times. Scarlett's laughter rang out, sharp and jarring, reminiscent of shattering glass. It's simpler to point fingers at the wicked stepdaughter than to confront the reality that their friend was truly a monster. The fragments of Cedar Falls' most beloved gossip tale shifted in Jacob's mind, crafting an image that twisted his Elijah in knots. A 15-year-old girl, alone and ensnared by a predator. A community that embraced the soothing falsehood instead of confronting the harsh reality. Where did you head off to when you departed? He inquired. First Denver, then Kansas City. Primarily engaged in factory work, yet. She gave a slight shrug. Words dance around you in gentle loops. There's always a connection, a thread that ties your narrative to another's. It becomes distorted with every retelling until you can no longer see your own reflection. Jacob reflected on his journey, considering how much it had evolved over the 3 years since his return from war. The once valiant soldier, now marked by his wounds, had slowly transformed into an enigmatic hermit, evoking pity and discomfort in others with his noticeable limp and profound silence. What brought you back? Scarlett's smile carried a melancholy akin to the gentle fall of autumn rain. I've exhausted all my options for escape. I thought, if I'm going to face hunger, I might as well do it in a place that feels like home. Just as Jacob was about to reply, the echo of several footsteps ascending the stairs caused them both to halt in place. This time, the tones were distinct, resonant, and more authoritative. Mayor Hutchins stood in the doorway, flanked by Sheriff Davies and Dr. Matthews. The mayor's ample belly pressed against a well-worn vest, yet his gaze remained as keen as that of a hawk. Jacobuel, the mayor remarked with a feigned warmth, believed it was time for us to discuss your circumstances here. What circumstance? Jacob rose gradually, his weight shifting onto his strong leg. Sheriff Davies advanced, his hand nonchalantly placed on his gun belt. Received notifications regarding a breach of tranquility. Residents expressing concerns regarding unusual sounds and peculiar actions. Which neighbors? Jacob inquired. The closest options are Morrison's, located just below us. Indeed, Dr. Matthews interjected, his voice resonating with the weight of knowledge and esteem. That's not quite the crux of the matter. The concern lies with the young woman's mental state. Scarlett pressed herself against the distant wall, her eyes wide with a haunting sense of dread. Jacob asserted with conviction that her mental condition is perfectly fine. Could it be? Dr. Matthews retrieved a leather satchel from beneath his arm. I possess a signed statement from her previous guardian, Harold Wickham, which outlines instances of violent conduct, theft, and moral decline. Legal basis for commitment to state asylum. The words struck the room with the force of a tangible impact. Scarlett emitted a faint noise from her throat, almost animalistic. Wickham has left this state entirely, Jacob argued. However, Mayor Hutchins stated with a calm demeanor that his sworn testimony arrived just yesterday via telegraph, accompanied by a request for us to guarantee that the girl receives appropriate medical care for her issues. Jacob's thoughts surged with intensity. This was not a matter of ethics or appropriate conduct according to Christian values. This centered on authority, the authority of esteemed individuals to dismiss uncomfortable realities and the women who bore them. She's staying right here, he murmured softly. Sheriff Davies' hand inched nearer to his firearm. Now, Jacob, let's not complicate things unnecessarily. The girl is evidently unsteady. Observe her. All attention focused on Scarlett, who was backed against the wall like a cornered creature, trembling and ghostly, embodying every expectation of a deranged girl. Yet Jacob perceived a different glimmer in her eyes. Not insanity, but a keen sense of strategy. The Jacoby keen insight he had caught sight of on that initial day. Scarlett, he murmured gently, share with them what you revealed to me about the pocket watch spring. Scarlett stared, her mind racing with uncertainty. What is happening? Exploring the unique atmospheres that various breaks can evoke, the way metal communicates when you truly pay attention. A glimmer of comprehension crossed her features. She adjusted her stance, a hint of fear dissipating from her demeanor. The spring in Mr. Aldrich's watch, she remarked, her voice gaining strength. It wasn't as tightly wound as he had imagined. It had warped from dampness, ancient dampness, likely from that time he tumbled into Miller's Pond last summer. Metal holds onto its scars, lingering long after you believe it's been mended. Dr. Matthews scowled. What is the connection between that and Mrs. Cooper's music box? Scarlett pressed on, becoming increasingly passionate about her topic. The cylinder was perfectly aligned. A small pin had been pressed down, likely by the inquisitive hands of her granddaughter. One must empathize with the singer who is slightly off-key, gently guiding them back to the correct pitch with the perfect amount of encouragement. The three officials shared hesitant looks. This did not seem like the utterances of someone unhinged. Moreover, Scarlett remarked, her intellect now shining in her eyes like a fire. Dr. Matthews, your pocket watch has been lagging behind for months now. I can perceive it from this distance. The issue lies not with the mainspring, but rather with the condensation forming beneath the crystal. It likely began when you accidentally spilled coffee on it during the challenging arrival of the Ella baby. Is that correct? Dr. Matthews instinctively reached for his vest pocket, his complexion drained of color in disbelief. What makes you think you have that knowledge? Scarlett smiled, and for the first time since Jacob had known her, it radiated pure confidence. Because I listen, she stated plainly, and fractured things reveal the truth, even when individuals refuse to. The silence lingered, taut and expectant, until Mayor Hutchins broke it with an awkward clearing of his throat. Well, he remarked, this alters the situation. Yet Jacob could perceive in their expressions that nothing had shifted whatsoever. If Scarlett wasn't furious, she was a threat. A young woman with a piercing clarity, determined not to fade silently into the shadows where uncomfortable realities were meant to reside. And that, Jacob understood, rendered her far more menacing than insanity ever could. The cry that pierced the November atmosphere wasn't Scarlett's. It belonged to Jacob. He lingered in the threshold of his workshop, crimson droplets cascading from his knuckles onto the aged wooden floor. 3 men were strewn about his workbench, resembling discarded playthings. Scarlett huddled in the corner, gripping a tiny hammer, her eyes filled with disbelief. What transpired in this place? Sheriff Davidson strode past Jacob, his hand poised on his gun belt. The lawman's expression was somber as he took in the devastation around him. Scattered tools, broken glass, and Elijah Brennan sprawled on the floor, groaning in pain with a visibly broken nose. "They came for her," Jacob murmured, flexing his bloodied hand. "I returned home to discover them surrounding Scarlett as if she were a wild creature." Billy Morrison fought to regain his footing, dabbing at the blood trickling from his split lip. "That girl is quite the troublemaker, Sheriff. She came at us with that hammer when we merely approached to converse." "Discuss?" Scarlett's voice trembled with fury rather than trepidation. "You labeled me in a derogatory manner and attempted to pull me out of the place." The third man, Pete Carlson, nodded with enthusiasm. "She's not telling the truth, Sheriff. Rumor has it that she has been circulating tales about Harold Wickham. Respectable people cannot allow that sort of toxicity in their community." Jacob's jaw clenched. Harold Wickham, the specter that lingered in Scarlett's darkest dreams. The stepfather who had wounded her in ways that still caused her to flinch at the sound of doors slamming too loudly. Sheriff Davidson surveyed the scene, his gaze shifting from the injured men to the quaking girl. "Which narratives?" Billy spat, asserting that he had imposed himself on her. "Unfortunate Harold departed the town, burdened by the weight of her deceit. Now she has this person with a disability fighting her battles." The term cripple lingered in the atmosphere, heavy and toxic. Jacob's war injury had always rendered him vulnerable to harsh words, but hearing it now in Scarlett's presence ignited a fierce and protective instinct within him. Scarlett stood slowly, declaring that Harold Wickham was a monster. Her voice resonated more powerfully with every word she spoke. "He visited my room each night following my mother's passing. He claimed it was my fault for being attractive, insisting that I had invited it upon myself." "Lies!" Pete shouted, though his gaze avoided Scarlett's. Sheriff Davidson raised his hand, signaling for quiet. "These are grave allegations, miss. What was the reason for not reporting this at the time it occurred?" Scarlett's laugh held a sharp edge. "To whom?" Harold held the esteemed position of fire chief in the town. He was adored by all. Who would trust the words of an orphan girl against his? Jacob observed the sheriff's expression intently. Davidson embodied fairness, yet he approached situations with a pragmatic mindset. 3 esteemed members of the community stand opposed to a battle-hardened veteran and a young woman burdened by her past. The calculations didn't align with their expectations. "She's got proof," Jacob declared abruptly, the words emerging from a place deep within him. Scarlett's gaze darted to him, a look of bewilderment crossing her face. Jacob hoped she would have faith in him, would go along with whatever scheme was taking shape in his thoughts. "What evidence?" Sheriff Davidson inquired. Jacob hobbled over to his workbench and grasped Scarlett's sewing box, the very one she had brought with her when she first arrived. His fingers traced the secret compartment he had unearthed weeks prior but had kept to himself. "Demonstrate it to him," he said softly to Scarlett. Her hands shook slightly as she grasped the box. For a brief instant, Jacob considered the possibility of declining. She pressed the small catch, and the Elijah panel effortlessly slid away. Within, there lay 3 objects: a frayed scrap of fabric, a dulled silver button, and a neatly creased letter. "Text," Scarlett whispered, holding up the cloth. "This is from Harold's shirt. From that night the night I finally stood my ground fiercely enough to break free." The button displayed the fire department's emblem, while Sheriff Davidson unfolded the letter with great care. His complexion turned ashen as he perused the words. "This is Harold Wickham's handwriting," he said slowly. "He's admitting to—" The sheriff's voice faded as he kept on reading. Billy Morrison reached out for the letter with urgency, but Jacob swiftly seized his wrist. "Don't," Jacob cautioned. His voice was eerily silent. "What does it say?" Elijah Brennan insisted, fighting to prop himself up. Sheriff Davidson regarded Scarlett with a fresh perspective. "It's a heartfelt acknowledgement, a revelation. He acknowledges that he has imposed himself on you time and again. He claimed he was departing the town, unable to confront the consequences of his actions. The workshop was enveloped in silence, broken only by the rhythmic ticking of the clock that Jacob had been diligently repairing. Why was this not presented earlier? Sheriff Davidson inquired softly. In a hushed tone, Scarlett admitted her shame. Because a part of me accepted the narrative that it was somehow my responsibility. Jacob felt a deep sorrow for the frightened girl who had borne the weight of her secret for 2 long years. He drew nearer, silently extending his support. Billy Morrison's face had turned pale. "That doesn't prove anything. She might as well have penned that on her own." Scarlett spoke softly, revealing that Harold had been sending money each month to the post office in Denver. "Sheriff Davidson has the authority to review the records." The sheriff gave a deliberate nod. "I shall. However, at this moment we must clarify the events that transpired here today." Jacob advanced with purpose. "My workshop was invaded. Scarlett received threats. I safeguarded her." "With your fists," Pete Carlson whispered. "With all that was required," Jacob responded with conviction. Sheriff Davidson examined the scene once more. The shattered glass, the scattered tools, the crimson stains on all our hands. "Did you guys kick this off?" Billy was adamant that we simply needed to have a conversation with her. As he broke into my shop, Jacob's voice resonated with the weight of his military experience. "By cornering a woman who's done nothing wrong, she's a liar," Elijah Brennan began to assert. "Watch yourself," Jacob interjected, his gaze menacing. "Exercise caution in how you conclude that statement." The atmosphere in the room was charged, almost palpable. Sheriff Davidson shifted his gaze from the bloodied men to Scarlett, who now stood tall, no longer shrinking back. The sheriff finally spoke, outlining what was about to unfold. "You 3 will be departing. You will share the revelation that Scarlett has spoken the truth regarding Harold Wickham, and you will keep your distance from both of them." "What is the status of our injuries?" Billy insisted. "You sustained those injuries while trespassing in a man's workshop and intimidating his friend," Sheriff Davidson remarked, casting a glance at Scarlett. "Appreciate that the situation didn't escalate further." As the trio of men hobbled out, Billy hesitated at the threshold. "This is far from finished, Tinker. The town will not tolerate this for much longer." Jacob held his gaze steady, unwavering. "Perhaps it's time to seek out a town that will embrace you." Once they departed, Scarlett collapsed into Jacob's chair, her entire body trembling from the aftershocks of disbelief.
I never imagined I would share the letter with anyone,
she whispered. Jacob knelt beside her, his hand tenderly resting on her shoulder. "What made you hold on to it?" "Deep down, I wished that one day someone would trust my words." She gazed at him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "You instilled in me the courage to dream." Sheriff Davidson adjusted his posture and cleared his throat, ready to address the room. "I must extend my sincerest apologies to you, miss. Everyone does. Harold Wickham deceived many well-meaning individuals." "What comes next?" Scarlett inquired. The sheriff appeared uneasy. "Honestly, this is bound to provoke a significant amount of frustration. Some people may struggle to accept that their views on Harold were misguided. They could hold you responsible for their embarrassment." Jacob sensed the tension radiating from Scarlett next to him. "Is she still at risk?" "It's a possibility. Perhaps you both are." Sheriff Davidson tipped his hat with a deliberate motion. "It could be wise to consider a temporary departure from town, at least until the situation settles down." Once the sheriff departed, Jacob and Scarlett remained amidst the ruins of the workshop, encircled by shattered glass and strewn tools. The truth had finally emerged, yet Jacob understood that it could have rendered them more exposed, rather than safer. "Do you feel regret?" Scarlett inquired softly. "That you defended me?" Jacob gazed at the resilient wounded girl who had endured unimaginable suffering, and yet still possessed the strength to place her trust in him. "Absolutely not," he asserted with conviction. "No matter what lies ahead, we will confront it side by side." The initial snowfall of winter drifted down, enveloping Cedar Falls in a pristine layer of white that transformed the landscape into a scene of freshness and renewal. Yet Jacob was aware that beneath the surface, the familiar old animosities and anxieties were beginning to awaken. The true challenge was only starting. Scarlett's hands trembled incessantly, lingering with the aftermath of the confrontation 3 days prior. She perched at Jacob's workbench, focused on mending a music box that had been shattered in the chaos of the fight. The delicate gears eluded her quaking grasp, slipping away like grains of sand. Every unsuccessful effort deepened her frustration, intensifying her anger towards herself for feeling inadequate. "It's not working," she remarked, gently nudging the fragile pieces aside. "I feel like I can't repair anything anymore." Jacob paused, glancing up from the task of sweeping away the final shards of shattered glass. "Your hands will find their calm when the moment arrives. Healing from trauma is a process that requires patience. We lack the luxury of time, Scarlett indicated with a motion toward the window. Have you noticed the way people gaze at us now? Mrs. Ella strides across the street as she spots me approaching. The baker has decided to stop selling us bread. Indeed, Sheriff Davidson had circulated the news regarding Harold Wickham's confession. The town had divided into two factions. A handful of individuals approached Scarlett, their expressions filled with embarrassment and discomfort as they offered their apologies. Yet many had become more distant, filled with rage, as if her revelation had turned them into unwitting partners in a wrongdoing they had previously overlooked. Jacob held up the yellow paper and announced, "Mrs. Sterling sent another telegram. She's curious if you'll make your way to Denver, mentioning she has tasks that would suit your expertise." Scarlett had been dodging this discussion for days. Mrs. Sterling's proposal was bountiful, an opportunity to learn from true artisans, to create a future that transcends the petty chatter of Cedar Falls. Yet, it seemed like escaping. "How about you?" she inquired. Jacob's response arrived with remarkable speed. "I will manage well in this situation. This is where I reside. Your home is punishing you for standing up for me." The truth lingered between them, a weighty presence that could not be ignored. Jacob's business had vanished in an instant. No one approached a man who had harmed 3 esteemed members of the community with their damaged possessions. The workshop that once served as his refuge was now transforming into his confinement. The sudden knock at the door caused them to halt in place. The hour was still too early for guests, and in recent times, unanticipated knocks signified trouble. Jacob opened the door to discover a young boy, his face smudged with dirt and his eyes filled with apprehension. "Mr. Hartwell, Mother instructed me to pass this along to you." The boy abruptly handed an envelope to Jacob and dashed away before either could utter a word. Within lay a letter penned in unsteady script. "Mr. Hartwell, my husband believes I shouldn't put this down on paper, yet I feel compelled to do so. What occurred with Scarlett mirrored my own experience 2 decades ago. Distinct individual, yet the Jacoby embarrassment. I kept it to myself, fearing that no one would take me seriously. Thank you for having faith in her. Some among us are aware of the reality, even if fear holds us back from expressing it. A companion." Scarlett perused the letter twice, her eyes widening in astonishment. "There exist others." "Those who understand your experience," Jacob said softly. "Those who truly comprehend. Yet, they remain hesitant to voice their thoughts." Scarlett rose and made her way to the window, mirroring my own actions. Throughout the morning, additional knocks echoed persistently. With every encounter, Jacob braced for the ire of the townsfolk or yet another round of menacing threats. Instead, they discovered little treasures. A loaf of bread rests on the doorstep, wildflowers arranged in a mason jar, a message expressing heartfelt gratitude for your bravery. By the afternoon, Scarlett found herself in possession of 7 anonymous letters from women who had endured similar assaults. Some were new, while others dated back many years. Each conveyed the identical message. They trusted her, and they felt a deep sense of appreciation that at last, someone had dared to voice the truth. "Look at this," Scarlett said, raising a letter from a woman who had been assaulted by her own uncle. She reveals that she has been burdened by the shame for 3 decades, 3 decades spent believing it was her responsibility. Jacob observed Scarlett's metamorphosis with increasing wonder. The shaking had ceased. She stood tall, her voice resonating with confidence. Perusing these letters had bestowed upon her something he had never managed to offer, the realization that she had company. "What thoughts are crossing your mind?" he inquired. Scarlett remained silent for an extended period, her gaze fixed on the stack of letters. After a moment of contemplation, she finally spoke up. "I'm considering Denver. However, the reasons may not align with your expectations." Just as Jacob was about to inquire about her meaning, another knock echoed through the door. This time, it was Sheriff Davidson, his expression somber and serious. "We must have a conversation," he stated. They gathered around Jacob's modest table as the sheriff laid out the details of the situation. Harold Wickham's admission had come to the attention of the territorial authorities. There was a desire to revisit a number of past cases involving young women who had leveled similar allegations against esteemed individuals. Sheriff Davidson stated that Scarlett's testimony will be essential. Her bravery in stepping forward has inspired others to share their voices. Scarlett's complexion drained of color. "Bear witness?" before the judges and attorneys and the men who caused you pain," Jacob concluded softly. The sheriff gave a slight nod. Several of these cases date back many years. With Scarlett's testimony and the courage of these other women stepping forward, we may finally witness the dawn of justice.
What if they doubt our words?
Scarlett inquired. Then you will have made an attempt, Sheriff Davidson remarked. And that exceeds what these creatures merit. Once the sheriff departed, Scarlett remained in quiet contemplation for an extended period. Jacob observed her features, witnessing the struggle between fear and resolve reflected in her expressions. "I have to do it," she said at last. "Do I not?" "There's nothing you need to worry about," Jacob replied. "You've truly exceeded expectations. However, if I fail to—" Scarlett grasped one of the unsigned letters. "This woman claims her assailant went on to harm 3 additional girls. 3 other girls who could have been saved had someone found the courage to speak up earlier." In that moment, clarity washed over Jacob. This had transcended Scarlett's healing. The focus was on safeguarding others from harm. He mentioned that the trials will take place in Denver. Scarlett gave a slight nod. "Mrs. Sterling mentioned that she would assist me in locating a place to stay, stating that she is acquainted with lawyers who focus on these types of cases. What comes next after the trials?" Scarlett surveyed the workshop that had transformed into her haven. "Once the trials are complete, my ambition is to establish a school, not for the purpose of developing reading and writing abilities, for young women seeking a place to belong. Girls are drawn to me." The concept was so flawless, so quintessentially Scarlett, that Jacob found himself questioning why it hadn't crossed his mind sooner. She aimed to transform her suffering into meaningful action, her endurance in duty. "What about us?" he inquired softly. Scarlett's expression became gentler. "Join me on this journey. We can collaborate on this. Perhaps you could instruct the boys in metalwork. I have the ability to instruct the girls. We have the potential to create something that thrives rather than merely endures." Jacob surveyed his workshop. The instruments he had gathered, the existence he had crafted, the secure, confined realm that had shielded him from danger, development, and affection. He turned his gaze to Scarlett, who was presenting him with an opportunity to transcend his own anxieties. "What if I lack the courage?" he inquired. "You are the most courageous person I have ever encountered," Scarlett stated plainly. "You confronted 3 men to defend me. You had faith in me when others did not. Your bravery surpasses what many achieve in an entire lifetime." That evening, while they gathered their sparse belongings, Jacob came to understand that courage wasn't merely an attribute one held. You made that choice, instant by instant, one choice at a time. "Do you feel fear?" Scarlett inquired while they carefully packed her limited selection of dresses into a weathered trunk. "Filled with dread," Jacob confessed, "yet also filled with anticipation. For the first time, I find myself filled with anticipation for what lies ahead." Scarlett beamed. For the first time in all the time he had known her, it fully reached her eyes. "That's the sign that you're on the right path." When fear intertwines with hope. On the morning train, they departed Cedar Falls, bringing along 2 trunks, a box of tools, and a collection of letters from women who had discovered their voices thanks to Scarlett's bravery. As the train departed from the station, Jacob caught sight of Billy Morrison on the platform, his expression contorted with rage. Yet Scarlett chose not to glance back. She was engrossed in drafting designs for their school. With her hands steady, she embraced a future filled with endless possibilities. "What shall we name it?" Jacob inquired, glancing back at the sketches. Scarlett paused to gather her thoughts, then inscribed at the top of the page, "The Hartwell School for Second Chances." She elaborated that it is something everyone is entitled to. Jacob nodded, grasping the essence of true healing, not by disregarding the past, but by harnessing it to create something greater. They were both shattered, yet together they were evolving into something more resilient than either could have achieved on their own. As the train whisked them away to their new life, Jacob understood the true essence of love. Not mending one another, but opting to create something exquisite from the fragments of their past selves. The future loomed with ambiguity, yet for the first time in years, it felt like a blessing rather than a danger. The sudden crash of breaking glass disrupted the tranquil morning in the Hartwell workshop, immediately followed by Scarlett's piercing scream of agony. Jacob abandoned his tools and hurried to the spot where she remained motionless. Crimson droplets fell from her hand, staining the floor of their Denver workspace. Yet, it wasn't the mishap that sent his heart into a frenzy. Her eyes were filled with a haunting terror. The identical look she had displayed on that initial day in Cedar Falls when the throng had encircled her. Apologies escaped Scarlett's lips, her gaze fixed on the shattered music box that had consumed 3 weeks of her painstaking effort. Mrs. Patterson will always hold this against me. She placed her faith in me with her grandmother's treasure, and I've completely messed it up. Jacob carefully grasped her injured hand, tenderly enveloping it in fresh cloth as his thoughts raced. After 6 months in Denver, their business was flourishing beyond their wildest expectations. However, achievement introduced different forms of pressure. Affluent clients possessed high standards, and a single misstep could ruin the reputation they had diligently cultivated. Accidents happen, Jacob murmured, but he noticed that Scarlett was not paying attention. She found herself in a different realm, engulfed in recollections of past moments when shattering something had resulted in consequences. The workshop door chimed, and Thomas Chun entered, the latest addition to the team, having arrived from the railroad camps. His face marked by burns that covered half of it. While the other workers had chuckled at him, Jacob recognized the meticulous hands and sharp intellect that lay beneath the surface of the scars. "Miss Scarlett," Thomas articulated with precision in his measured English. "The lady from Patterson has arrived. She desires to gaze upon her music box." Scarlett's complexion drained of color. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson was far from an ordinary cuss Elijah. She held the title of spouse to the most influential banker in Denver. Her endorsement might unlock opportunities with every affluent family in Colorado. Her disapproval had the power to shut them down in an instant. Jacob began to express that we require additional time. However, Scarlett shook her head. "No more deceit," she declared, holding her posture firm, even with her hand wrapped in bandages. "If we are destined to fail, we shall do so with integrity." Jacob experienced a clash of pride and concern within him. The Scarlett who once concealed herself in madness in Cedar Falls had vanished, transformed into someone who confronted challenges directly. Yet, at times, bravery can prove to be as perilous as timidity. Mrs. Patterson glided into the workshop with an air of elegance, her luxurious dress whispering softly with every movement. She appeared to be younger than Jacob had anticipated, perhaps around 35, possessing keen eyes that observed everything. A man followed her, one Jacob had never seen before. Tall, impeccably dressed, exuding an air of authority that suggested he was accused Elijah to having things go his way. "Mrs. Hartwell," Mrs. Patterson said with a gentle smile, "I trust you bring delightful news regarding my grandmother's music box. Mr. Whitmore is quite enthusiastic about reviewing your work. He serves as the representative for numerous affluent families from the eastern region." Scarlett inhaled deeply. "An incident has occurred, Mrs. Patterson. This morning, I accidentally dropped your music box, and unfortunately, it's beyond repair now." The stillness lingered, taut and expectant. Jacob observed the way Mr. Whitmore's expression hardened, noticing the slight wavering of Mrs. Patterson's smile. Their reputation, their future, their meticulously crafted new life, all of it teetering on the precipice of what would unfold next. Yet, Scarlett pressed on, her voice gaining strength. "I have a suggestion." She strolled over to her workbench and lifted a wooden box that had lingered there for weeks. Within were the remnants of the shattered music box. Yet there was more. Tiny gears and springs fashioned from silver and gold, created with a craftsmanship that left even Jacob momentarily speechless. "I can't return your grandmother's music box," Scarlett said, "but I can offer you something fresh. A box that plays the Jacoby tune, crafted with the skills I've gained from my past errors. Though it may not be the identical item, it will embody the Jacoby affection." Mrs. Patterson grasped one of the silver gears, lifting it to the light. The artistry was unparalleled, surpassing anything Jacob had encountered, even from the renowned jewelers they had explored. "This is truly extraordinary," she murmured. "The meticulous craftsmanship is remarkable." Mr. Whitmore leaned forward, his professional facade fading to show authentic curiosity. "Who guided you to achieve this level of proficiency?" "Struggle," Scarlett replied with ease, and a person who thought that shattered pieces could transform into something exquisite. During the following hour, Scarlett shared her techniques as Jacob and Thomas showcased the tools and methods they had created. Mr. Whitmore posed technical questions that would have baffled many skilled artisans, yet Scarlett responded to each with increasing assurance. At last, Mrs. Patterson rose to her feet. "Mr. Whitmore, I would love to hear your thoughts." "I believe," the man said with deliberation, "that my clients in New York must see this work without delay. Mrs. Hartwell, might you be open to accepting a commission from the Astor family? They seek an individual to revive a collection of European music boxes that were harmed in a recent fire." Jacob sensed the world transform around them. The Astor family represented ties to the most affluent individuals in America. It signified an achievement that surpassed all their wildest aspirations. Yet Scarlett wore a frown. "What would be the duration of my absence? Departed?" Mr. Whitmore appeared perplexed. You'll have to make your way to New York for the first consultation. It might take around 2 months to finish the task at hand. Separated by 2 months. Jacob attempted to mask his disappointment. Yet Scarlett noticed it right away. In the half-year since departing Cedar Falls, they had not experienced a separation lasting longer than a single day. Scarlett expressed her need for some time to reflect. Once the visitors departed, the workshop seemed overwhelmingly silent. With Thomas gone, Jacob was left in solitude with Scarlett, marking their first moments together in hours. She lingered at her workbench, examining a broken gear repeatedly in her hands. "This is your opportunity," Jacob said at last. "The moment we've been striving for." "Our opportunity," Scarlett amended. "This was a collaborative effort. However, it is you who possesses the true gift. I'm simply Dash." "Cease." Scarlett's voice cut through the air with precision. "Do not even think about completing that thought. I've heard you criticize yourself for far too long, and I refuse to listen to it any longer." She rose and strode over to where Jacob was arranging tools, her movements sharp with fury. "Do you really believe I'm unaware of the sacrifices you make daily? How do you handle the challenging cuss-Elijahers so I can avoid their scrutiny? How do you manage the business aspect, assuming you believe I'm too delicate? How you act like your leg isn't in pain while you endure those extra hours on your feet so I can sit and focus on my work?" Jacob began to voice his objections, yet Scarlett continued undeterred. "I was shattered when you discovered me, indeed, but you were fractured as well. The distinction lies in the fact that you've been so preoccupied with mending me that you overlooked the need to mend yourself." The impact of the words was more profound than any strike could ever be. Jacob settled onto his work stool, burdened by the months of concealed fatigue. "What happens if I don't succeed?" he inquired softly. "What happens if I struggle to stay on track with our project?" Scarlett's fury transformed into a gentler emotion. She grasped his scarred hands with hers, her touch tender, even with her bandaged palm. "Then we stumble together," she said, "and we begin anew. That's the essence of partnership." The evening lights of Denver began to twinkle softly in the dusk. In the far-off horizon, the sound of a train whistle echoed, hinting at adventures to destinations they had never dreamed of exploring. Finally, Jacob mentioned the opportunity in New York. "What would you like to pursue?" Scarlett smiled, and Jacob recognized in her expression the unwavering resolve that had guided them both through their most challenging times. She expressed her desire to compose a letter to Mr. Whitmore, conveying that Hartwell and Associates operates collaboratively as a team. "If he seeks my talents, he also acquires yours. If that doesn't work for you, there are numerous other affluent families who could be more accommodating." Jacob gazed at her, filled with wonder. The once timid girl who had concealed herself behind a veil of madness was entirely transformed, now embodying someone who recognized her value and stood firm in her truth without remorse. "Are you truly prepared to gamble everything?" "Jacob," Scarlett said, her eyes glinting with playful mischief, "have you not figured this out yet? The greatest danger lies in choosing the path of least resistance." A knock echoed at the door, as though her words had conjured it into existence. Jacob hobbled over to discover a young boy clutching an envelope adorned with the Patterson family seal. Within the envelope lay a note from Mrs. Patterson, accompanied by an item that caused both Jacob and Scarlett to gasp in surprise. A bank draft amounting to 3 times their standard fee, accompanied by a proposal for Scarlett to conduct metalworking classes for the wives and daughters of Denver's high society. It appears, Scarlett remarked, lifting the check with trembling hands, that dismantling certain things can occasionally open doors to greater opportunities than we could have ever anticipated. As Jacob gazed at the figure inscribed on the draft, an unsettling concern began to take root in his thoughts. This level of success would attract an unprecedented amount of attention. And attention, as they discovered in Cedar Falls, could pose a greater threat than poverty itself. Were they now resilient enough to face whatever challenges lay ahead? The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning that began like any other, yet would culminate in Jacob and Scarlett confronting the most challenging decision of their new life together. Scarlett was conducting her third metalworking class for a group of Denver society ladies when Mrs. Patterson suddenly entered the workshop, her face a mix of excitement and what appeared to be fear. "Scarlett, my dear, you must look at this right away," she exclaimed, extending a newspaper that still carried the scent of fresh ink. "It revolves around you, the two of you." The headline sent a chill down Jacob's spine. The enigmatic artisans of metal in Denver. The reality of the Hartwell success narrative. Below it was an in-depth article exploring their history in Cedar Falls, featuring quotes from Billy Morrison and others who depicted Scarlett as a cunning woman who had charmed her way into Jacob's safeguarding. However, that wasn't the most troubling aspect. At the bot Elijah of the page lay a smaller story that sent tremors through Jacob's hands. Harold Wickham discovered deceased in a hotel in San Francisco. Authorities are currently conducting an investigation. Scarlett peered intently at the words on the page. Her curiosity piqued as she leaned closer. Her breath became more and more shallow with every word spoken. Wickham was discovered with a letter tucked away in his pocket, a revelation regarding his actions towards his stepdaughter, crafted in remorse and urgency prior to his final act. "He's gone," Scarlett murmured. "At long last, he has met his end." The society ladies, once engaged in lively conversation about their metalwork, fell into a hush, their eyes gleaming with a ravenous curiosity that thrived on the hidden truths of others. Jacob could almost visualize them weighing the impact of this scandal on their personal images. "Perhaps," suggested Mrs. Vandenberg, the mayor's wife, "we ought to delay today's lesson, considering the situation." One by one, the women crafted their justifications and departed, carrying their whispers with them like armaments. In just an hour, the workshop that once thrived with energy now seemed empty and forsaken. Scarlett sat at her workbench, her gaze fixed on the newspaper, yet her mind wandered far beyond its pages. "It seems like it goes on forever, doesn't it?" She spoke softly. "Regardless of the distance we cover or the structures we create, the past inevitably finds its way back to us." Jacob yearned to provide solace, yet his thoughts were consumed by pressing matters. This story would capture the attention of their largest clients. The chance in New York could vanish. All their efforts could fall apart due to the opinions of others and Harold Wickham's ultimate act of ruin. A sudden knock broke through his anxious musings. Thomas Chune lingered in the doorway, his scarred visage etched with a deep sense of worry. He addressed the boss, articulating each word with precision. Outside, men are inquiring and probing for answers. They claim to hail from publications in San Francisco and Cedar Falls. Inquire they do about Miss Scarlett and the deceased gentleman. From his vantage point by the window, Jacob noticed a modest throng assembling on the opposite side of the street. News spread quickly in Denver's close-knit social scene, and whispers of scandal spread even quicker. "We could leave again," Scarlett said suddenly. "Gather your things and slip away before the situation escalates. Begin anew in a fresh place." The words lingered in the atmosphere, ethereal and elusive. Jacob surveyed the workshop, taking in the array of tools gathered over time, the unfinished projects scattered about, and the life crafted with meticulous dedication. Beginning anew required letting go of all they knew, yet remaining meant engaging in a struggle they had never wished for. "Or," a new voice emerged from the doorway, "you might choose to stand firm and allow the truth to reveal itself." They glanced over to find Judge Harrison McCall, a figure of great esteem in Denver, standing there with his hat clutched in his hands and a look of compassion in his eyes. Following him was Dr. Sarah Mitchell, one of the rare female physicians in Colorado, alongside Father Miguel Santos from the Catholic Church. "In this town, news spreads quickly," Judge McCall remarked softly. "Yet so does the truth. when decent individuals decide to voice it. Dr. Mitchell advanced, her medical bag clutched in one hand, while the other held a neatly folded paper. I have studied women who have endured the Jacoby experiences as Scarlett. The indicators are clear, and any competent physician would identify them without hesitation. Harold Wickham's admission merely reinforces what any reasonable person could observe. Father Santos acknowledged with a solemn nod. I have provided guidance to numerous individuals who have experienced such abuse. The blame lies solely with the perpetrator, never with the victim. A community that punishes a woman for the wrongs of others has clearly strayed from its moral compass. Jacob sensed a release within his chest, a tension he hadn't acknowledged he was holding on to. These were more than mere cusseligers or business associates. They were individuals who recognized Scarlett's essence and opted to stand by it. Judge McCall went on to elaborate. Mrs. Patterson has been quite occupied this morning. She has reached out to every family you've collaborated with, highlighting your talent and honesty. A number of individuals have taken the initiative to write to the newspapers in support of your reputation. Scarlett lifted her gaze for the first time since finishing the article, a glimmer of hope dancing in her eyes like a candle flame swaying in the breeze. What is the reason? She inquired. What motivates them to stand up for us? Dr. Mitchell beamed with warmth. Because, my dear, you've inspired countless women in this city to craft something beautiful with their own hands. You have instilled in them a sense of confidence they were previously unaware of. That deserves protection. As the hours unfolded, their workshop transformed into an experience Jacob had never anticipated, a haven for those who believed that integrity held greater value than controversy. Mrs. Patterson came back with a circle of her friends, each one holding their metalwork creations and resolute in their commitment to persist with their lessons, undeterred by the chatter around them. Thomas gathered his friends from the railroad camp, individuals who understood the weight of being evaluated based on looks instead of deeds. Judge McCall remains to address inquiries from the tenacious reporters, clarifying Colorado law on libel and slander in a manner that prompted several of them to rethink their narratives. However, the true astonishment unfolded as evening approached, with the arrival of a telegram from New York. Mr. Whitmore had perused the newspaper article, accompanied by Harold Wickham's admission. His message was concise, yet unmistakable. Character exposed in times of strain. The offer remains valid. When are you able to begin? Scarlett perused the telegram thrice before revealing it to Jacob. They still want us, she said, a hint of wonder in her voice, despite having all the knowledge. Particularly with all the knowledge at hand, Jacob corrected. Enduring what you have endured requires immense resilience. That's not a scandal. That clearly demonstrates the type of individual you are. As the last of the supporters trickled out and the workshop fell into a hush, Jacob and Scarlett stood together, faced with a pivotal choice that would define their path ahead. The opportunity in New York was genuine, yet so was the foundation they had established in Denver. They had the option to venture east and serve the affluent, or remain in the West and persist in guiding others to discover their own power. What are your thoughts on this? Scarlett inquired, taking a seat next to Jacob on the bench they had crafted together from remnants of fine wood. Jacob surveyed the workshop once again, then turned his gaze to the woman who had shown him that healing was a shared journey between two individuals. Half a year prior, they had found themselves as exiles from their own history. Now they had become educators, entrepreneurs, and above all, collaborators who had cultivated a deep and unwavering trust in one another. I believe, Jacob said thoughtfully, that we possess something here that holds greater value than any commission. We are surrounded by supporters, engaged in meaningful work, and presented with the opportunity to demonstrate that one's history does not dictate their destiny. Scarlett nodded, her choice firmly established. While New York boasts numerous artisans, Denver is in need of what we are creating here. She approached her workbench and started composing a letter to Mr. Whitmore, politely declining his offer while recommending several other talented metalworkers who could meet his client's needs effectively. As she penned her thoughts, a profound sense of fulfillment enveloped Jacob. They confronted their deepest anxieties today: vulnerability, scrutiny, the looming possibility of losing all they had created. But rather than chaos, they discovered connection. Rather than feeling shame, they discovered a sense of support. Rather than fleeing once more, they opted to stand their ground and battle for the life they desired. 3 years later, The Hartwell workshop transformed into an entity beyond the wildest dreams of both Jacob and Scarlett. Their educational initiatives had grown to encompass injured workers, women striving for autonomy, and anyone else who needed to discover that shattered things could be transformed into something beautiful. The newspaper article that was supposed to ruin them had, in fact, attracted students from all over the nation. Individuals seeking guidance from mentors who recognized that genuine expertise is forged through facing challenges rather than evading them. On this particular morning, as Jacob observed Scarlett leading a young widow through her inaugural metalworking lesson, he recognized that they had achieved something far more significant than mere riches or renown. A haven was forged, allowing individuals to unearth their intrinsic value, no matter the messages the world had imparted about their entitlements. Prepared for the next student? Scarlett reached out, and Jacob made his way over to greet an anxious young man whose left hand bore the scars of a mining mishap. "I'm not sure I can learn this," the man said, gazing at his injured hand. Jacob smiled, recalling a different man who had once believed his scars rendered him insignificant. "My boy," he spoke softly, "the finest educators are those who have experienced the journey of mending their own pieces. This is precisely where you need to be." As the lesson commenced, Jacob noticed Scarlett's gaze from across the workshop. Her smile mirrored his, and in that instant, he grasped the profound lesson they had both come to understand. True healing arises not from erasing the past, but from embracing its lessons to empower others in discovering their own strength. Outside, Denver kept evolving and transforming, yet within their workshop, shattered items turned into stunning creations each and every day. And that, Jacob understood, was the most transformative act of all, declining to believe that anyone or anything was beyond redemption. The value of shattered remnants, they discovered, wasn't defined by their losses, but by the creations they decided to forge from the fragments that lingered.